Good morning, everyone. My name is Jacqueline Mariano, and I am one of the co-chairs of the International Committee of the National Lawyers Guild. And thank you for joining us this morning at our press conference to denounce the United States government's illegal threats to destroy North Korea through war. The National Lawyers Guild was founded in 1937 with an internationalist perspective, supporting legal work and people's movements in the US and around the world, to the end that human rights shall be regarded as more sacred than property rights. Within the National Lawyers Guild is the International Committee, and we thought that it was imperative to make a public stance against the US government's illegal threats to destroy North Korea, which President Trump emphasized during his statement to the United Nations. And particularly in this time when we are still recovering from the violence, the memory of violence and war from the unended Korean War, where 635,000 tons of bombs were dropped by the United States on the Korean peninsula, and 20% of the population was killed. The National Lawyers Guild International Committee is making a very public stance against this continued warmongering in the region. We have invited several peace activists, anti-war activists, to join us today to show that the progressive community, progressive legal community is united with activists on the ground in the movement to end the war. So we'll hear from a few speakers today. And I would like to invite our first speaker, who is a Korean peace activist from the Least of These Church and their Justice and Peace Committee. Please welcome Reverend Kim.
Thank you for letting me joining this, honor this conference, the press conference. Yeah, so I would like to read some our, as we call it, the position and demands. Let me read. Do not provoke war with North Korea. Trump's pro-war rhetoric is heightening the danger of nuclear war on the Korean peninsula. We Korean in the diaspora, Korean American, oppose the outbreak of any nuclear war on our Korean peninsula or the United States. The root cause of these ongoing tensions is the U.S. hostile policy against North Korea. The U.S. government must stop and give up its hostile policy against North Korea, as well as its strategy to establish hegemony in the Northwest Asia region. We strongly urge the U.S. government to actively take the path toward dialogue and peace instead of continuing on the current path of sanctions and war. We wish for all Korean and American people to coexist peacefully in this land, in our homeland, Korean Peninsula. We as Koreans, our demands are very clear. First, stop all war provocation against North Korea. Second, give up the hostile policy against North Korea. That is the root cause of its nuclear weapons program. Third, declare an end to the Korean War and sign a peace treaty. That's all. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker from the United National Anti-War Coalition, or UNAC, is Sarah Flounders.
I'm here to speak today with the deepest national concern from the United National Anti-War Coalition, a coalition of social justice, anti-war, anti-racist organizations across the country, and to join with the National Lawyers Guild, International Committee, the International Association of Democratic Lawyers, and many, many concerned organizations to say that we can never forget that 5 million Korean people died in the Korean War, 20% of the population killed, the country left in ashes and ruins, generations scarred by this war. The whole world has heard the message at the United Nations. In September, this is an international body created supposedly to end the scourge of war, to create a body of international law that would guarantee basic human rights. And yet here at the United Nations, and also constantly in the past months, Trump has used the terms locked and loaded for the US missiles, that fire and fury are created, and at the UN, nuclear annihilation. This is of enormous, enormous concern to everyone in the world, using this platform to threaten the people of Korea, the people of Asia, the people of the whole world with nuclear war. And it's not only President Trump, and it's not just words. There's been 70 years of occupation, 70 years of threats coming from both the Democratic and the Republican Party. U.S. troops have occupied South Korea since 1945, and there's still 28,000 troops there, 38 bases, and a militarized Gulf course, as it's called, which is really the center for the THAAD, thermal high altitude area defense missiles that have been installed. So there's been a permanent state of war on the Korean peninsula. It's meant huge profits for Wall Street, for the military industries, and it's meant occupation for the people of the South. Big profits and low wages, and severe, extreme repression, decades of military dictatorship, and every year militarized massive war games all around the Korean peninsula. And every year, and constantly now, jet aircraft loaded with nuclear weapons flying just off the coast of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. So this is an explosive, dangerous threat to the entire region. And we say that there's only one way to diffuse the tensions on the Korean peninsula. The U.S. must sign a peace treaty ending the 1950-1953 war. It never has. Instead, it has continued the threat of war every single day. So we called for signing the peace treaty, getting the troops out, and letting the people of Korea determine their own destiny. That's a way toward peace.
Our next speaker from the International League of People's Struggle, or ILPS, is Bernadette Ellerin.
Good morning. The International League of People's Struggles, a global anti-imperialist alliance of 300 groups in 40 countries, stands in solidarity with the Democratic People's Republic of Korea and the Korean people in asserting their national sovereignty, self-reliantly pursuing social development, and developing their capacity for nuclear deterrence and self-defense. Currently, the US government under Trump has the largest and most expensive nuclear arsenal in the world, with 7,000 nuclear warheads, and it is the only country that has ever used it in combat. Trump's saber-rattling and threats against the DPRK must be seen in this context. The DPRK's nuclear weapons program is part of its deterrence and self-defense strategy against a long-running U.S. policy of hostility towards the DPRK. U.S. bombs killed 20% of the population and leveled more cities in North Korea between 1950 and 1953 than they had done in Japan and Germany during World War II. Without its development of nuclear weapons and missile delivery systems, the DPRK would have become an easy target for high-intensity aggression like Iraq, Libya, and Syria. U.S. imperialism has never signed a peace treaty with the DPRK since the armistice in 1953. The U.S. has never recognized the DPRK diplomatically and has threatened it with annihilation ever since it was founded in 1948. It has positioned tens of thousands of U.S. troops, missile systems, nuclear, and other weapons of mass destruction in 15 bases in South Korea and as a constant threat to DPRK's existence. And yet the U.S. has never solved the problem of offending China and Russia by unleashing all-out aggression or nuclear war against the DPRK. If the U.S. persists in its scheme of pressuring Russia and China to join the U.S. and its allies, but the U.S. persists in its scheme of pressuring China and Russia to join the U.S. and its allies in cutting off all economic relations with the DPRK. Trump is threatening to cut U.S. trade with any country that conducts any economic activity with North Korea in order to trigger the latter's collapse. The U.S. threats of further sanctions are accompanied by a major military buildup on the Korean peninsula and the THAAD deployment in preparation for outright war, rapid invasion, and strategy of constantly decapitating the DPRK leadership. The ILPS condemns in the strongest terms the long and continuing record of U.S. imperialist aggression, economic blockade, war provocations, and nuclear blackmail directed against the DPRK. We hold U.S. imperialism responsible for creating the extremely volatile situation in the Korean peninsula at present. We stand with the Korean people of the North and South who aspire for and are working for peaceful reunification and defeat all divisive schemes of U.S. imperialism. U.S. out of Korea. Peace treaty now. Korea is one. U.S. out of Asia and the Pacific. Long live international solidarity. Thank you.
Thank you, Bernadette. Our next speaker from the International Action Center is Christian Cobb.
I stand with the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. Trump continues to make disgusting threats against the DPRK. His threats are a call for genocide. That is why I am here to say I stand in solidarity with the DPRK. The U.S. has never ended its war against the DPRK. It never signed the peace treaty from the Korean War. And as was said before, this is the war in which the U.S. flattened their country, dropped 635,000 bombs, and killed 20% of their population, which is why the DPRK has the right to defend itself. This is because the U.S. has never ended its attempts to destroy the DPRK. What Trump said at the UN is only a brazen and blunt declaration of what the U.S.'s mission has always been. Since the Korean War, the U.S. has occupied South Korea and threatens the North with nuclear weapons and invasion. What we need is a war against racism and fascism. We need money for jobs, housing, healthcare, and education. U.S. troops out of Korea.
Thanks, Christian. And our last speaker is Jean Myrer from the National Lawyers Guild International Committee.
Thank you, Jackie, and thank you to all the other speakers for the expressions of both solidarity and for peace in the Korean Peninsula. The International Committee of the National Lawyers Guild wanted to hold this press conference in part because there seems to be complete silence on the part of the in civil society against what Trump is doing, and we need to start the process of making sure that that silence is broken. I have on the table here two pieces that were written by Marjorie Cohn, who is a member of the National Lawyers Guild and also a Deputy Secretary General of the International Association of Democratic Lawyers, of which I am also president. The International Association of Democratic Lawyers was founded in 1946 in essence to try to promote the goals of the United Nations Charter. And the National Lawyers Guild is a proud affiliate of the International Association of Democratic Lawyers. I want to raise not only the political points, which I agree with, but the issues of law, because what Trump has done by saying he wants to totally destroy North Korea is not only an anathema to human rights, civilization, threats of genocide, etc., it is also highly illegal. Under the UN Charter, which was signed in 1945, and understand the preamble of the United Nations Charter starts as we the peoples of the United Nations. It's not the governments, it's we the peoples of the United Nations, determined to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. And what else is said in that preamble is that we need to reaffirm the faith in fundamental human rights and the dignity and worth of the human person in equal rights of men and women and nations large and small, and to establish conditions under which justice and respect for obligations arising from treaties and other sources of international law can be maintained, and to promote social progress and better standards of life and larger freedom. This is the preamble to the United Nations Charter. And to implement it, all nations are required to refrain in their international relations from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state or in any manner inconsistent with the Charter. Saying at the United Nations that the United States intended to totally destroy North Korea is a threat, and it's illegal. And President Trump should be held to account for his illegal actions. Also want to note, for people who think that maybe the United Nations Charter is international law, that it is not. It is ratified. It was ratified 89-2 by the US Senate. That means, under our Supremacy Clause and our Constitution, that the UN Charter is domestic law, and everyone is required to uphold it. With respect to Korea, the United States has never complied with the terms of the 1953 armistice. The armistice required the parties to meet within 3 months of the signing to conclude a formal peace treaty. This has never happened. The armistice called for the removal of foreign troops from the peninsula. The Russians and Chinese removed their troops. The United States has not. They still have thousands and thousands of troops, military bases, and are trying to build a large military base on Jeju Island over the opposition of the population. The armistice called for no new weapons being introduced into the country. Yet, nevertheless, the Eisenhower administration put nuclear weapons there. They were taken out, but now we have the introduction of the THAAD. The United States has been selling billions of dollars of arms to the South Korea each year, billions of dollars. In the past, there have been agreements made and broken between the United States and North Korea. For example, in 1994, framework negotiated between the US and North Korea called for the North Koreans not to develop nuclear weapons in return for light water reactors and other aid. This agreement was negotiated by Jimmy Carter and Kim Jong-un's grandfather, Kim Il-sung. This was never implemented, in part because Kim Il-sung died and the United States thought the regime would collapse. it did not. The IADL and the National Lawyers Guild unites with all of the sentiments about the need for a permanent peace treaty on the Korean Peninsula. The National Lawyers Guild, as well as the International Association of Democratic Lawyers, supports the development of this treaty to promote peace in the region. I also want to mention the Non-Proliferation Treaty, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, that demands that the United States live up to its obligations under Article 6. And what Article 6 says is that all nations of the world have an obligation to negotiate in good faith to eliminate nuclear weapons from, not just reduce them, eliminate nuclear weapons in the world. This section was reinforced by the International Court of Justice opinion in 1996, which said that nuclear weapons needed to be eliminated and called on countries of the world to implement Section 6 of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Nothing has been done to do that. The United States, by threatening to destroy North Korea, is threatening not just violations of the Charter, but genocide, crimes against humanity, and other massive violations of law, both domestic and international. The National Lawyers Guild and the International Association of Democratic Lawyers will not stand idly by to let that happen. We must unite all the peace-loving peoples of this country to stop this effort. Thank you very much.
Thank you again to our speakers. I think everyone's statements show that we are very united today on several points, that we want to hold Trump to account for his illegal war threats, that we urge the U.S. government to stop its war provocations against North Korea, and that they turn to diplomatic means to resolve its issues, to sign a peace treaty and end the decades-long Korean War. It is also very clear that the organizations today stand in solidarity with the Korean people, and that we will defend human rights and people against genocide, violence, and the indignities of war. So I'd like to thank everyone again for coming today. Should we do some Q&A? Yes, if folks have some questions, we'll take that. Yes?
Could you imagine the American people being offered the proposition that we should apologize to North Korea for the wrongfulness of the war?
Does any of our speakers want to address that?
I think much more than an apology is needed. A commitment, which is what the call for signing the peace treaty is what is really required for the U.S. to do, to commit to ending the war, and also reparations to the people of Korea for massive, massive destruction. Ending the sanctions would be the very first step for peace for all the people of Korea, but ending the sanctions, paying reparations, and signing the peace treaty.
Thank you for your question, and Sarah for answering. Yes.
I'm John Catalanato from Workers' World newspaper. I'd like to ask anyone on the panel that, aside from spreading the word of the press conference, of the news conference today, are there any plans for other actions reaching out to the population of the United States to try and win support for this, either protest demonstrations or meetings? Is anything planned as of now?
I think we envision this as at least part of a plan. We assume that the people present today will continue to move this issue forward. unfortunately, it's very difficult to break into the mainstream media. I do want to mention that one of our members, Eric Sirotkin, did a webinar which has a lot of very important information, and it's on the National Lawyers Guild International Committee website, and which is nlginternational.org, in which he does lay out a long history of the efforts to promote peace in the region. The idea of bringing together a broad peace movement is really absolutely critical at this point, because it's not just North Korea. Right now, we're still heavily involved all over the world. We have hundreds and hundreds of military bases throughout the world. We have hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars and billions of dollars going to keeping the arms race going to promote U.S. Desires for imperialist wars and not just imperialist wars, but to keep the world destabilized in such a way that the U.S. the people really can't fight back, and we want that to stop. We need to have the kind of unity and speak with one voice on this issue. So I hope today, from this press conference, it will raise awareness, and we will be able to pull more people together.
My English is very short, so my church members can miss me, and it's translated. 우리 지금 코리아의 사우스 코리아에 있는 프로그레시브 빅 코얼리션에서 트럼프가 재팬, 코리아, 차이나, 필리핀, 또 비엔남 가는데, 그때 아시아 방문할 때 코리아 전체적으로 빅 랠리가 있고, 그리고 여기 재팬 또 US랑 차이나에 있는 코리안들에게 같이 연대해서 빅 랠리를 하자. 그리고 그 각 지역에 있는 이런 프로그레시브한 평화운동 단체나 그 단체들하고 함께 시위를, 국제연대 시위를 노벰버 4에 그때 하자고, 그 전후로 해서 하자고 제안을 했습니다. 그래서 오늘 그렇지 않아도 제가 사라한테 또 지금 다른 단체들한테 그 말씀을 드리려고 했습니다.
So in South Korea, there is a coalition of progressive Korean peace activists, and they are getting ready for a mass demonstration with Trump touring Asia and making his way to South Korea around November 6th, 7th. And so they're planning on doing a large action on November 4th, and they're hoping, they're calling out to Korean activists in the region as well as in the U.S. to join in those actions, having their own actions in their regions. And so in the U.S., we're thinking of holding an action around that time as well, and we're hoping, we're calling for other international peace activists, anti-war activists to join in that.
It means pan-Korean rally is no Trump, rally of no Trump, and also internationally, the South Korean, the organization suggest me, and then I spread all in the U.S. cities. Already sent in Korean yesterday and people yesterday, and they already get me. I already got the response. There will be build a rally with each the region with American activists and group though. So I would like to ask the Sarah and Bennett, and all other the U.S. the peace activist group and another progressive group. So I would like to solidarity with us during the Trump visit the East Asia. So I will send you the more detailed plan about this. Okay.
And then be also going to the Philippines in November because after Trump visits Korea, he's going to go to the Philippines. The main agenda in the Philippines will be attending the 50th meeting of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or the ASEAN, which is a regional multilateral group that comes together to talk about economic policy in the region. And following the ASEAN meeting, there will be a convening of the East Asia Summit, in which representatives from the South Korean government, Japan, and China will also be attending, and the U.S. as well. So one of the agenda points for this meeting will be military bases, U.S. military bases, because discussions on economic policies in the region are always coupled with discussions on U.S. military bases, because the main function of U.S. military bases, and the reason why the largest concentration of U.S. military bases is in the Asia-Pacific region, is because it's the biggest market for U.S. products. And so the U.S. bases, especially naval bases, function to control the major shipping lanes, the trading routes in the area. So that's why any discussion on economic policies will be coupled with a discussion on establishing more military bases. So that's why President Trump will be going there. So I'm also a member of Bayan, or Bagong Aliansang Makabayan, here in the U.S. and in the Philippines. So Bayan will be organizing Bayan and ILPS will be organizing a major demonstration, international demonstration in the Manila around the time of the ASEAN meeting and the EAS meeting to counter those meetings, especially when Trump is there. So we will be organizing a major caravan from Manila to the site of the meeting, which will be the former site of Clark in Pampanga, which was the site of the former U.S. Air Force Base, permanent Air Force Base in the Philippines at the time. So we will be doing a camp out, and we will be having a U.S. delegation also participate. And so I agree with Reverend Kim. It would be good if we could have solidarity actions also here in the U.S., particularly in New York. And I would love to coordinate with the IAC and Reverend Kim and other peace activists here in New York to be able to identify days of action where we could actually mount actions here in New York City and across the U.S. to really amplify what's happening in Asia at that time. Thank you.
This is an important time for many mobilizations, and just to highlight again what Reverend Kim raised, there was a national conference call yesterday to confirm actions across the country during the November 4th visit, and to focus attention to begin to rally people to understand the very grave real threat, which will be highlighted and intensified during this visit. To also invite, there will be an important meeting here on Friday, October 27th, so it's next Friday, organized for the Korean speaker Jo Yuk-gol, who is a activist in South Korea, very much for Jeju Island against the THAAD missile deployment, and this is a meeting sponsored by Nodu Tol for Korean Community Development, the Global Network Against Weapons, Nuclear Weapons in Space, the U.S. Peace Council, Veterans for Peace, Brooklyn for Peace, and International Action Center, United National Anti-War Coalition, and a number of other groups. So that will be next Friday, and also an opportunity to discuss mobilization for November 4th and continued mobilization. But today is an important opportunity because it shows that it is legal voices of progressive lawyers nationally and internationally who are rallying their resources and their networks also to speak for peace in Korea.
Thank you, everyone. Bill?
Bill Dory's International Action Center. Would anyone care to comment on the 20 years of the International Humanitarian Law? What is the status of the 20 years of the International Humanitarian Law? What is the status of the 20 years of the International Humanitarian Law? rapidity and readiness of the United States to carry it, to deploy military forces to Korea, in contrast with the seeming inability of the U.S. government to assist the people of Puerto Rico and Virgin Islands. This time to answer.
I'm glad you asked that question because we've been pining about what's been happening in Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico. Everybody there is suffering trauma, absolute trauma, from the fact that there's no water, there's no electricity, there's no, the infrastructure is completely destroyed in many areas, and that the debt that has been accumulated primarily to vulture funds in the United States is crippling the ability of the people in Puerto Rico to in fact control their own destiny. The fact that the U.S. thinks, and this is and it's not just the U.S. It's not just the government. People in the U.S. think that if there's a problem, pull out an effing gun and shoot it away. That's really the way in which people, if there's a problem, you either militarily face it or it's not solved. And that kind of thinking is the kind of thinking we have to undo, because problems need to be solved, and they need to be solved using all types of means. And I think the idea that you can whip up war fever in this country so quickly is very scary. We saw it happen in the build-up to the Iraq War. All the media was on board with it. You couldn't get any voices heard. At least now, with respect to Puerto Rico, there's a lot of people pushing back. But I think the point is extremely well taken. The United States and people of this country have to stop thinking that you can solve problems with a gun and with military solutions, because military solutions are not solutions. They're just more war.
We have a question.
Oh, question. Reverend Kim has a question for you.
Yeah.
In South Korea에도 지금 여러분들 같은 이 민주 변호사 협회가 있습니다.
So in South Korea, there's also an organization of lawyers called Lawyers
Minbyun.
for Democratic Society.
Minbyun, yes.
Oh, Minbyun.
They're a member of IADL.
If it's possible, you would be the joint statement in this situation.
Yeah.
So I would like to.
I definitely, our Asian Pacific region has recently formed a coalition called the COLAB. It's the Conference of Lawyers of Asia Pacific, and includes the Philippines, Vietnam, Indonesia, Japan, and we're all meeting in Vietnam at the end of November, and this is going to be high on the agenda. I think perhaps before that we can in light of the Trump visit, I'm going to ask all of our affiliates in the region to issue statements.
In South Korea media, in South Korea, the general media, the even conservative media, 만약에 민변이 무슨 스테이트먼트 보도를 해줍니다.
So in South Korea, even in mainstream media, if Minbyun puts out a statement, it gets covered by all those.
Yeah, the president comes from Minbyun.
그 만약에 조인 스테이트먼트 하면 굉장히 큰 인커리지가 도움이 될 겁니다.
So in South Korea, if there is a possibility for a joint statement put out and it gets covered, that'd be a huge sort of encouragement for the people of Korea.
We will follow up on that. It's definitely on our agenda to do. Thank you.
An example that really illustrates the distinction between like the U.S. threats to DPRK and the U.S. abandoning Puerto Rico is seen in the budget that came out for the Pentagon, where it was about $700 billion. That's money that needs to be going to jobs, healthcare, and education to be able to support Puerto Rico at home, abroad, not for war.
I think we can close on that point. Thank you so much, to Reverend Kim, to Sarah of UNAC, Bernadette from ILPS, Christian of IAC, and Jean of NLG and IADL. We have made a very strong statement of unity today. You know, as discussed in some of our points, the struggle isn't over. This is just one step in ending the war in the Asia Pacific and on the Korean Peninsula. So thank you so much again for joining us, the National Lawyers Guild, for our press conference, and continue with the struggle. Have a good day.